President Trump sacks his attorney general after she refused to implement his controversial travel ban. Donald Trump's team have defended the move, saying he had to send a message to the civil service that it was not their place to challenge him. After last night's protests here, more than 70 MPs call for Donald Trump to be banned from addressing Parliament if his state visit to Britain goes ahead. Downing Street says the state visit is months away and no timings have been worked out yet. Also this lunchtime, the road to Brexit. MPs begin debating a bill to trigger Britain's exit from the EU before tomorrow's vote. Should parents be allowed to take their children on holiday during term time? A legal battle is underway at the Supreme Court. A silent epidemic, as millions say they feel lonely but wouldn't admit it. A campaign's launched to tackle it in the name of murdered MP Jo Cox. Hundreds of baby chimps stolen from the wild in Africa and sold as pets. How the authorities are trying to clamp down on the illegal trade. And the primary schools letting their pupils wear slippers, as research suggests it helps them do better in class.
In the south, gunned down on a Tunisian beach. An inquest hears more details about the death of a retired scientist from Hampshire. And centre stage at the Supreme Court, the Isle of Wight dad fighting for the right to take term time holidays.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. President Trump has sacked his acting Attorney General, accusing her of betrayal after she told government lawyers not to defend his controversial travel restrictions in court. Sally Yates, who was appointed by President Obama, had said she was not convinced Mr. Trump's temporary ban on travellers from 7 Muslim countries was legal. Richard Lister reports.
It is a battle over American values, and it's going on all across the country. In Columbus, Ohio last night, it was met with pepper spray. In Dallas, Texas, there was a silent vigil and concern about what the future holds.
We came from Mexico, and things unfortunately aren't great there now, and to deny somebody the opportunity to be able to build a future just seems completely wrong.
But the most significant protest came from Sally Yates, an Obama appointee asked by President Trump to stay on as acting Attorney General until his own pick's confirmed. In a letter to the government's lawyers, she said it was her duty to stand for what is right. And I am not convinced that the defence of the executive order is consistent with these responsibilities, nor am I convinced that the executive order is lawful. She was sacked within hours. A furious White House said she'd betrayed her department and accused her of being very weak on illegal immigration.
Protection of the nation from foreign terrorist entry.
This executive order may be controversial, but polling suggests at least half the country supports the temporary immigration ban against these 7 predominantly Muslim nations.
These 7 nations, one, they definitely are not our friends, and 2, are not willing to provide the necessary background information on their nationals for us to even consider allowing them to visit our country.
But Washington's preparing for another day of congressional confrontation. Democrats say the president's approach is causing chaos.
If this continues, this country has big trouble. We cannot have a Twitter presidency. We cannot have a presidency that thinks, oh, this sounds good, let's just go do it and not think the consequences through.
And in a sign of the unusual times, the former president broke with protocol to say he fundamentally disagrees with the notion of discriminating against individuals because of their faith or religion. There is much at stake. President Trump will announce his pick for the Supreme Court later today, a hardline conservative who will influence the course of American government for years to come.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
In just 10 days, Donald Trump has changed America to the point that the European Council said today he was among the biggest challenges faced by the EU in its 60-year history. Richard Lister, BBC News.
Downing Street says President Trump's state visit to the UK is months away and no timings have been decided. More than 1.5 million people have now signed a petition urging the government to cancel it. Our diplomatic correspondent James Robbins reports.
They don't like the new president or his policies, and they certainly don't want him here as an honoured guest of the Queen. There has never been so much public protest against a state visit before it even starts. The government is standing firm. Its invitation to Donald Trump on behalf of the Queen stands, although a former head of the Foreign Office says it was issued far too quickly.
It's the government's role to make sure that the Queen isn't dragged into political controversy, and I think they have to watch that dimension, given the level of public concern about this state visit invitation. The state visit is the highest accolade the country can pay to a foreign leader, and normally it's offered after, say, a US president has been in office for several years. And to issue the invitation in the first days of President Trump's being in the White House to happen in the next few months felt to me, when I heard it, a bit premature, frankly.
President Obama, much more popular in Britain, was in his third year of office when he was given a state visit in 2011. He'd been before on politically focused official visits, but it's the pomp and pageantry of a full state visit which delivers the really coveted imagery.
Is the government embarrassing the Queen with this state visit?
Today, cabinet ministers were staying silent on the controversy, but Number 10 is now stressing it's months away, while rejecting Lord Ricketts' objections. Prominent pro-Brexit MPs are right behind the invitation.
This is a very important state visit in the national interest, and it represents the recognition in this country of the United States in relation to the whole of our foreign policy, our alliances through 2 world wars, and the whole of the Brexit question as well.
No date has yet been set for the state visit, but the petition against it is steadily gaining support. James Robbins, BBC News.
The President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, has named the Trump administration as one of the threats to the European Union. In a strongly worded letter to member states, Mr. Tusk said America has now joined Russia, China and radical Islam when it comes to threats to Europe, and he called on Europeans to stick together. Our Europe correspondent Damien Grammaticus is in Brussels. A very strongly worded letter.
It was, and what's very interesting is that Donald Tusk has done this just before a meeting of Europe, a summit of European leaders at the end of this week. He chairs those summits. He prides himself on being a sort of tough-talking, straight-talking sort of chairman of those meetings, and likes to lay out what he sees as the biggest issues facing the EU. And as you say, he identifies threats externally, China, assertive Russia, but also the United States, saying worrying declarations by the new American administration all make our future highly unpredictable. He goes on to talk about the new administration putting into question 70 years of American foreign policy. I think what we see here is a sense of real concern, some disorientation in Europe about what the Trump administration is doing. But interestingly, Mr. Tusk finishes with a call to say there are trade opportunities for Europe to stand up for open trade too.
Damien Grammaticus, thank you. MPs have just begun debating the bill which gives the government the authority to start the formal process of leaving the EU. The legislation allows for the triggering of Article 50. It looks set to be approved in a vote tomorrow, with Labour MPs being told by Jeremy Corbyn that they should back the bill. But some Labour MPs say they will join the SNP in voting against it. Our political correspondent Ian Watson reports.
The phony war is over. The courts have given Parliament a say over whether and when Britain leaves the European Union. So now MPs have to nail their colours to the mast. Are they going to argue over what type of Brexit they want, or are they going to oppose it entirely? The government's warning that MPs who vote against triggering Article 50, the formal process of leaving the European Union, would be defying the will of the people.
So at the core of this bill lies a very simple question. Do we trust the people or not? Yeah. The democratic mandate is clear. The electorate voted for a government to give them a referendum. Parliament then voted to hold the referendum. The people voted in that referendum, and we are now honouring the result of that referendum.
If the legislation to leave the EU were compared to, say, a train, it would be a Eurostar on a fast track. MPs get just 2 days of debate this week, 3 days next, and the government hopes it will all get through the House of Lords by early March. If you were to stand here at the very heart of Parliament At any time over the last quarter of a century, you'd meet plenty of Tory MPs who are willing to defy their party line on Europe. But over the next 2 days of debate, it's Labour's divisions that will be on display. Jeremy Corbyn has already lost 2 members of his top team, and I'm told that 3 shadow cabinet members are considering whether to resign over his instructions to trigger Article 50. And perhaps around 24 former ministers and shadow ministers are likely to rebel too. One of them is the man who challenged Jeremy Corbyn for Labour's leadership. I asked him why he was still defying his leader and now also his constituents.
I still think that Brexit is likely to make our country poorer and our politics meaner, and I think some of us need to stand up for the interests of the people we represent and stand against this headlong rush to leave the European Union and send us over the cliff.
And other opposition parties will attempt to stop Britain's exit from the EU in its tracks.
We need to protect Scotland's place in Europe, and that's why we're not prepared to give the UK government a green light, carte blanche, to do whatever it wants in relation to the Brexit negotiations.
But many of the Conservative MPs who have qualms over Brexit are flagging up that they won't rebel now.
The Prime Minister has said that MPs will get a final vote at the end of the process. This bill we're considering this week and next week is a process to start the negotiations, to trigger the notice.
So expect a lively debate in Parliament, but don't expect a major upset. Ian Watson, BBC News, Westminster.
Our assistant political editor Norman Smith is in Westminster. So 2 days of debate, then the vote. They're getting through this very quickly.
They are, although listening to David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, opening the debate there, he seemed to have lost his voice a bit. He's going to need it over the next few days because he is facing an almighty parliamentary tussle. Yes, over the timing, anger at the way this legislation is being fast-tracked through with just 3 days of detailed scrutiny. More than, 100 amendments have been put down, a sort of encyclopedia of amendments to try and shape Mrs May's approach to Brexit. Anger, too, that this paper the government first promised back in December, setting out Mrs May's plans for Brexit, still hasn't been produced. I don't know if you ever read the sort of Beano or Dandy, Sophie, but when the sort of the Bash Street Kids or Dennis the Menace were involved in a bust-up, there'd be boots and fists everywhere, grunts and groans, shouts. That's pretty much what's going to happen in the Commons. And yet, you sense at the end of it, Theresa May is going to be emerging unscathed. She will have her bill and in the timetable she wants. Why? Well, bluntly, because her opponents are divided. Tory rebels, they do not want to fight. Now, in the House of Lords, they fear if they try to defy the result of the referendum, it could provoke demands for scrapping the House of Lords. And crucially, Jeremy Corbyn has told his MPs to back the legislation. So confident is Mrs May, her people now think she can get the bill through by March the 9th, weeks before her end of March deadline.
Norman Smith in Westminster, thank you. And you can see continuing coverage of that debate over on the BBC News channel now. A legal battle over the rights of parents to take their children on term-time holidays reaches the Supreme Court today. 5 judges will hear an appeal by a council which fined a father, John Platt, for taking his daughter to Florida without her school's permission. Mr Platt challenged his fine in the High Court and won. Our education correspondent Gillian Hargreaves reports.
John Platt, a dad from the Isle of Wight, fighting his case in the highest court in the United Kingdom over a £120 fine for taking his daughter on holiday to Florida.
It's a shocking situation that if I lose today, that any unauthorised absence of any child in any school in England, that a criminal offence will have been committed.
Warm seas, soft sand, trying to book a family break without incurring the big increase in price that tour companies charge during the school holidays is a big challenge for most families.
They shouldn't take weeks and weeks out of school, but I don't think one family holiday per year is going to affect a child's education.
It's a little bit too inflexible a system, I guess, because there can be lots of sort of mitigating family circumstances.
If it's during the school term and the rest of your class is coming into school and gaining their education, I don't think it's really fair that you get to take this time off.
And the government agrees, saying even a few days away from school can have a big impact on exam results. But teaching unions think fining parents isn't the answer.
It's important that children attend school, it's important that heads are given the professional responsibility to make discretion, and it's important schools don't get into conflict with parents over the issue of fining. Better to engage and educate parents than to have conflict with them.
Hearing in the appeal, Isle of Wight Council and Platt. This morning, judges were told the case rests on whether it's right to fine a parent for taking their child out of school if that pupil usually attends school regularly. Who doesn't dream of a warm summer holiday on a dank, miserable January day? The great challenge for the judges at the Supreme Court is to decide whether parents have the right to take that holiday at a time of their choosing. 35 schools have told the BBC they've revised their guidance since Mr Platt's case went to court. Gillian Hargreaves, BBC News.
The time is 1:15. Our top story this lunchtime. President Trump sacks his Attorney General after she refused to implement his controversial travel ban. And coming up, could wearing slippers to school help pupils do better in class?
In South today, gunned down on a Tunisian beach. An inquest hears more details about the death of a retired scientist from Hampshire. And trying to keep the wheels turning, a campaign is launched to save Britain's oldest working water mill.
Now, it's been called the silent epidemic. More than 9 million people privately admit that they are always or often lonely, but most would never admit that in public. That's according to research carried out ahead of the launch today of a new campaign to tackle loneliness. It's being set up in the name of the murdered MP Jo Cox and will look for practical solutions to tackle the problem. Tim Muffet reports.
It is a horrible problem. You sort of go down and down and down. We lost your confidence.
Sandra's loneliness was all-consuming.
Loneliness, it leads to other things. You know, it affects your mental health and things like that, makes you depressed.
How bad did things get for you?
Really bad. Really bad where I didn't want to live anymore.
Made aware of her isolation, Sandra was visited by her MP, Jo Cox.
I wanted to speak to Jo. I wanted to talk about the elderly being lonely, isolated, ill, nobody going to their homes. She was really shocked, really, I thought. She was really listening, you know, intense, and I think she looked a bit upset as well.
Jo had begun setting up a cross-party commission on loneliness to help tackle the issue when she was murdered.
Identified as one of those issues where she felt she could make a real difference.
Today, with the backing of her family, it is officially launched.
We've had our very dark days and our very dark times, as you would expect, but actually we're not going to be beaten by what's happened. And certainly for me, I've decided that I'm going to come out fighting and I'm going to try and make some of the change and some of the difference that Jo can't make for herself anymore.
The idea is that politicians, charities and other organisations work together to help those who feel isolated.
We were like that from being kids. People is what we cared about. So I can't go back to normality because there is no normality without Jo. But what I can do is try and work to continue some of the good stuff that she did and to try and make her proud.
More than 9 million people, around a fifth of the UK adult population, often feel lonely, according to one study. The impact on health can be profound, but admitting that loneliness is a problem can be difficult.
Hi, Sandra.
Hiya. Are you okay?
Sandra contacted the Royal Voluntary Service, one of 13 organisations supporting the Jo Cox Loneliness Commission. Volunteers like Victoria take time out to visit lonely people. The impact can be profound.
It is quite a simple thing at the end of the day. I spend 1 hour of my whole week. I stop in on the way home from work. It's no extra effort on my part, but actually the benefits that people get out of it, I think, will be massive in terms of what you can do.
They'll try and help if they can. Really, really nice people.
Do you get out much in the cold?
Start a conversation. The motto of the new Loneliness Commission is simple. It's hoped it'll be effective. Tim Muffet, BBC News.
New emails which have just been released appear to show that Lord Coe was aware of corruption allegations in his sport before they were made public. The head of World Athletics had told a parliamentary select committee that he was unaware of the specific claims of a Russian doping scandal. Our sports editor Dan Roan is at the BBC Sports Centre. How serious could this be for Lord Coe?
Well, it certainly doesn't look good for him, Sophie. After all, he is, as you say, the most powerful man in world athletics as the president of the IAAF. This all stems back to an appearance, an evidence that he gave to a parliamentary select committee in December of 2015. He was asked then about what he knew exactly and when about the great Russian corruption scandal that rocked the sport to its foundations the previous year. Those allegations first became public in a documentary aired in Germany in December of 2014. Coe said that he wasn't aware of the specific allegations, but then the problems began for him effectively in three stages. First of all, the BBC Panorama programme last summer revealed that the former runner Dave Bedford had sent an email to Coe with attachments detailing his concerns about those allegations. Coe said in response that he hadn't ever opened the attachments, he merely forwarded the email on to the head of the IAAF's Ethics Committee, and therefore he didn't mislead Parliament. However, then Bedford appeared in front of the parliamentary committee, said that he was surprised and disappointed to hear that from Coe, and now today this email has been revealed that Coe sent to Sir Michael Beloff, the head of the IAAF's Ethics Committee, in which he said he was in fact aware of the allegations 4 months before that German documentary. Now, Coe importantly says that doesn't constitute a discrepancy. He wasn't actually specifically asked about timing by those MPs, but the head of the parliamentary committee, Damian Collins, has today said that he finds Coe's defence an excuse and that it's clear that he withheld effectively certain relevant information.
Dan Roan, thank you. More than 600 women in Russia are killed in their home every month, victims of domestic abuse. Despite that, new laws are expected to be passed that reduce the penalty for those found guilty of abusing their partners. It means first-time offenders whose victims don't need hospital treatment will no longer face a prison sentence. The move was presented as a way of protecting the family unit, but some fear it sends a dangerous signal that violence in the home is acceptable. Sarah Rainsford reports from Moscow.
Marina tells me her story in a quiet, calm voice, but the details are horrific. Her husband beat her almost every day for over a year. She's in hiding now, so we've disguised her identity. Marina's heels still have metal plates in them. They were shattered when her husband pushed her through the window of their flat.
He came home one night and started to strangle me. When I ran, he shoved me and I fell from the second floor. I broke both my feet, my lower ribs, and when I got out of hospital, he carried on beating me in my wheelchair.
But in Parliament last week, as contenders for Miss University were posing for photographs, deputies were reducing the penalty for domestic abuse. There'll now be a fine for abusers, not a prison term, if the victim is not seriously hurt. The proposal sailed through, with talk of protecting families from interference.
I think that government shouldn't tell men and women how to behave with each other. And in this case, it's like you're lying with the bed, sleeping with the bed with your wife and a lawyer and some human rights organization.
Those who work with victims of violence are worried, though.
With so little protection in law, there are also very few places here where women who are suffering from abuse can actually run to. There are just 2 state-run shelters here in Moscow, and then there's this place, which is run by charity and helped by the church. But for women whose situation has become a crisis, places like this are a really important refuge.
This is where Marina is staying for now, with 4 other families. The director tells me women get help here to rebuild their lives and advice on pressing charges if they want to. But that was hard even before the law changed.
Maybe 1 in 1,000 women manages to bring her case to court. And now the maximum punishment is a fine. So if the woman goes home, she has no protection, and her husband can take his revenge.
Marina has a new job and says she's starting to feel safe again. But she's now battling for custody of her youngest child, left behind when she ran for her life. Marina's oldest daughter escaped with her. She smiles as we chat and she names all the cows here at the farm. But her mum says she still cries herself to sleep at night. And Marina fears that stopping the kind of abuse her family suffered just got even harder here. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, Moscow.
Hundreds of baby chimpanzees have been seized from the wild in West Africa over the past decade and sold as pets in places like the Gulf and China. A year-long investigation by BBC News has exposed a global network of traffickers who are trading the animals. Our science editor, David Shukman, is here. Explain what you found.
Well, yes, we went undercover with colleagues posing as buyers, dealing with traders who were offering us baby chimpanzees. And what we uncovered is a series of connections that stretch from the jungles of Africa, where poachers go out and catch infant chimpanzees, who then sell them to middlemen, buyers, who then have connections in airlines, in airports, with corrupt officials who sell them export permits. And ultimately you reach buyers wealthy enough to pay £10,000 for a baby chimpanzee in China or Thailand. It's seen as a very exotic thing to have a baby chimpanzee, and they are adorable, but it is fueling demand, which trickles all the way back to the jungle. So what we've uncovered is that there are these connections, a secret international network, with one of the cruelest forms of wildlife crime. We hear a lot about the slaughter of elephants and rhino for their tusks and their horns, but this is a different kind of crime, because to get one infant chimpanzee alive out of the jungle, you generally have to kill its family, which typically means up to 10 adults are killed just to get the one infant ready for trade.
What can the authorities do about it?
Well, there are laws about it. There's an international treaty, there's a convention which most countries have signed up to, so it's illegal to sell chimpanzees commercially, but there are ways around that. You can buy the export permits that allow you to do it. I think the absolute key thing is to try and choke off demand. We've seen how China over Christmas announced that it was banning all trade in ivory, which wildlife campaigners have seen as absolutely key for helping stop the slaughter of elephants. Well, if people can be persuaded not to buy a baby chimp, maybe it'll make a difference back in the jungles.
David Shukman, thank you. Now, he's been in charge of the TARDIS for just over 3 years now. Peter Capaldi has announced that he is quitting his role as Doctor Who. The actor, who became the 12th Time Lord in 2013, said it had been cosmic, but it was time to move on. Our entertainment correspondent Lizo Mzimba reports.
From his very first scene in 2013, Peter Capaldi gave the impression this was a role he'd dreamed of playing for years. In fact, he had. A lifelong Doctor Who fan, he'd even written to the Radio Times when he was 15, praising the show. Now he's decided it's time to leave.
I feel sad. I love Doctor Who. It's a fantastic programme to work on. And I feel it's sort of time for me to move on to different challenges.
He brought his own unique versatility to the part, sometimes playful.
Shush.
Occasionally sinister.
I've done my best, but I strongly advise you to keep out of my way. You'll find that it's a very small universe when I'm angry with you.
He's been a popular Doctor with fans. The crowds that turned out for the screening of his first episode were as big as those for some film premieres. And this appearance in America, one of many overseas trips, where he's helped build Doctor Who into an international brand.
This is Clara, not my assistant. She's some other word.
I'm his carer.
Yeah, my carer. She can, so I don't have to.
Along the way, of course, he's met plenty of old enemies.
Doctor! What's a Dalek?
And he'll be teaming up with a new companion for his final season, which starts in April.
Where are we? Basically in the middle of a war. And it's not as bad as it sounds. I'm the Doctor. I will save all your lives, and when I do, you will spend the rest of them wondering who I was.
He'll leave in this year's Christmas episode, so now there's huge speculation about who'll be the next actor, or perhaps actress, to take on one of the best-known and enduring roles on television. Lizo Mzimba, BBC News.
Children at some primary schools in England are being allowed to wear slippers in class after research suggested it helps them to get better grades. The study from Bournemouth University found children who attend lessons without shoes work harder and behave better. Frankie McCamney reports.
Not what you'd expect to see in a typical classroom, but gone are the days here of shining shoes and tying those laces. Slippers and socks are in. This school in Croydon is one of a handful in the country taking this different approach, allowing children to come into the classroom wearing just slippers or socks. But the real question is, what do the pupils think?
I feel more comfortable and I find a new experience of learning a different way. Without wearing your shoes, it feels more comfy and it feels like your own house. And you don't always have to wear footwear, and it doesn't really feel like you're in a classroom. It feels really wide and it feels like you're home. Without shoes, it makes you feel like you're much more at home instead of being restricted. I don't know why, but I just like to have my toes being able to, I don't know, be free.
The science behind it all comes from a 10-year study covering 25 countries, which found leaving shoes at the door created a calmer and quieter environment, with children spending even longer in the classroom. And teachers here believe it's working.
Going to work is about more than being able to tie your shoelace, for a start. The skills that children learn by being in these flexible learning zones are actually the skills that that employers really cry out for.
There has been criticism, though. Some worry children are missing out on formal skills. But after 4 years of no shoes here, this school believes others should be following in their footsteps. Frankie McCamley, BBC News.
Weather now with Chris Fawkes. Hello.
Hi, Sophie. It's one of those weeks where we're looking at very unsettled weather conditions. And as the week goes by, it is going to turn increasingly windy as well, with a succession of areas of low pressure lining up to come our way. This one might become a named storm by the Irish Met Department, and further west, this one over the Great Lakes is probably cause for greatest concern here in the UK. Now today we've got some big temperature contrasts across the UK. Southwesterly winds working in to southwest England, bringing some mild weather here. Temperatures up to 13 degrees. With the cold winds still coming in from the continent, temperatures are struggling in eastern England, and worse still, there's a significant wind chill. It is quite a windy day. What unifies us, for most areas anyway, is cloud and rain. There will be more of that to come as we go through the afternoon. Probably the wettest weather in Scotland, although the rain will tend to pick up again across southwest England later in the day. Just a few spots really working in across central and eastern England. One place that will see some sunshine is Northern Ireland. Here, temperatures reaching around 10 degrees. Now overnight, we're going to see another pulse of rain working its way northwards and eastwards across England and Wales. And this area of rain is going to become quite slow moving across eastern counties, so it will be a wet old night here. There's the risk of some fog patches for Northern Ireland and Scotland, where we could see a few patches of frost developing in the coldest spots, but otherwise it's a relatively mild night. Here are your overnight temperatures. Now on into Wednesday's forecast, we're looking at a wet start to the day with this slow moving band of rain gradually edging its way eastwards through the day. Then a brighter spell of weather comes in as we go on towards the afternoon, so many of us will see at least a bit of sunshine ahead of the next system that will bring some rain back into Northern Ireland, western part of Wales and also southwest England to end the day. Now on into Thursday's pressure chart, you can see quite a vigorous area of low pressure lining up and getting close to Ireland, so this could become a named storm by the Irish Met Department, but for the UK, it's going to be a wet and a windy day with gales around our coast and hills. We'll see that rain pushing eastwards as the day goes by, but again, the wind's coming in from the south, so it should be a relatively mild day. Temperatures up to around 12 degrees. Now take a look at this pressure chart. What a beastie this is, a deep area of low pressure targeting the United Kingdom. Now this could bring us some disruptive weather. Now, the computer models have different ideas about where this area of low pressure is going. It could well bring some severe gales to parts of the United Kingdom with the risk of some disruption, but some of the computer models take that low instead into France, bringing disruptive weather to the French. Either way, it looks like someone's going to be hit hard. We're just not sure whether it's the UK or France, but we'll be working on that over the next few days.
Chris, thank you. And that's it from us. Now it is time to join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.